The leaves are changing color, the days are getting shorter, and the ducks are getting in some final laps as winter is rapidly approaching here on the campus of Ohio State University. And students report that with shorter days, there can be some changing emotions.
I do tend to get more depressed, and I sleep a lot more in the winter.
Or antisocial.
A lot of times I just don't feel as active. I feel more tired, want to sleep a little bit more.
None of this comes as a surprise to Ohio State behavioral neuroscientist Randy Nelson.
The seasons of the year have a profound effect on us. We find that individuals respond differently, both affectively, cognitively, and in other ways, motivation and so on, at different times of the year.
And Nelson's research with these Siberian hamsters includes exposing some of them to 16 hours of light per day, called longer days, while other hamsters receive only 8 hours of light and 16 hours of darkness, a laboratory version of shorter days, much like winter. These two conditions of longer and shorter days have differing effects upon the animal's brains, stress hormones, gene expression, behavior, and affect. And the research is helping to answer basic questions about how seasonal changes affect mood.
And we think that this has importance for a number of human conditions, such as seasonal affective disorder that some individuals suffer from.
But why Siberian hamsters?
A Siberian hamster is not a typical laboratory animal. It's not like a mouse, but it had certain traits, responsiveness to day length, having seasonal adaptations that we thought we could exploit in understanding human seasonal changes in mood.
It all begins shortly after birth at about 20 days, when weaning is complete and the hamsters are either exposed to long days or short days. But how exactly does one assess the mood of a hamster?
Well, the biggest issue is it's very difficult to get into the head of these animals in terms of, are you depressed, are you anxious?
So behavioral tests for anxiety have been designed.
These are the animals we're going to be using in the study today.
Like walking on an elevated maze several feet off the ground. It's called an elevated plus maze, with the name coming from its plus-like shape.
It's a test of anxiety for rodents. We put the animals in the center of the maze, and if they are anxious, they'll tend to go into this enclosed part of the maze, which is more secure for them. If they're less anxious, they'll come out here into the open arms and explore. And we use the amount of time that he spends in the open arm compared to the closed arm as an index of anxiety. But what we find is that the animals in short days tend to be more anxious. That is, they spend more time in the enclosed arms than the animals that are reared in the long day lengths. Even if the animals are reared in short days and then switch to long days, their heightened anxiety persists throughout their lives. So being born in short days has a long-term effect on their affect.
But to ensure that these differences are really due to mood, researchers use this inclined plane
that we use to test locomotor dexterity in these animals. We want to be able to rule out any locomotor deficits before we can determine that it's a mood or affect that's being changed by the day length compared to something else. So what will happen here is this hamster will turn around, face up, and the amount of time it takes to face up is what we measure. And there's no difference between the long day and the short day animals on this task.
And the plus maze also plays a role in human drug research.
The elevated plus maze is really a gold standard in the pharmaceutical industry when they try to test new drugs that reduce anxiety. And this is one of the first steps they use in mice and rats to test the effectiveness of such drugs. If the drug reduces anxiety, the animals will spend more time out in the open.
There are also behavioral tests for depressive-like responses.
One that's very useful to us and easy to assess is anhedonia, or the failure to take pleasure in things that previously brought pleasure. We do this by giving them this treat, this condensed sweetened milk, which they love.
Hamsters reared in long days take a lot of pleasure in this treat.
Here's a long day hamster. He should drink some of this.
But not those reared in short days.
Here's a short day hamster. You'll see he'll avoid this. We use that as an assessment of depression.
But interestingly,
if we give the short day animals Prozac, that reverses that anhedonia. We've also seen that animals that are born in short days and then get moved to long days retain this depressive affect throughout their lives. So that somehow short days essentially programs the brain to be more susceptible to depression and anxiety. And that also maps onto certain conditions in humans where people with depression and schizophrenia also show a higher preponderance of birth during the winter than the summer.
But just how, biologically, does length of day produce these effects?
Day length gets changed into a physiological signal through this hormone called melatonin. And essentially, melatonin is excreted only at nighttime. So if there's a relatively long duration of melatonin, it means it's a long night or a short day. And so you have a winter series of adaptations or responses seen in the individual.
And so this research focuses on one straightforward manipulation.
It highlights an environmental factor that's very simple. Number of hours of light per day, and yet it evokes a whole cascade of different genetic responses.
In other research, some of the hamsters in the short day condition are reared with their siblings, while others are reared in isolation. Stress levels can then be measured in each of these conditions.
So this is the room where we analyze the blood levels of stress hormones, cortisol. He's basically conducting an assay to measure the cortisol. There's 4 or 5 steps that he needs to complete. Basically, you have to magnify the signal because the levels of hormone in blood are so very low. These blood analyses have determined that the animals that are isolated are exhibiting more stress than the animals that are housed with a partner.
And the greater the stress, the more susceptible they are to illness.
I think the next step for us is we're going to try to block melatonin receptors in the brain in certain ways, in time-released ways. We'd also like to do some light therapy to see if we can change this. We'd also like to see what's going on early on that's imprinting the animals in day length so that they are at higher risk and see if we can reverse that.